Thank you all for coming back. I've seen you both before. This seminar is to help walk you through audio mixing and talk about some of the many pitfalls that you can fall into when doing audio mixing. My name is Anthony Burokas. My company is Aiba Communications. And today we're going to talk about audio. And with audio, there are so many ways to die. I'm carrying the ninja theme through. I did all this last night. It's actually kind of fun. What ways are there to die? Bad microphone placement. It's too far, you've got a podium mic like this and they just keep walking away from it. They lean back, or if they get a handhold. My favorite is they've got a handhold and they use it to point. So you understand what I'm talking about. I see a nod. Next one is the source audio overwhelms the microphone. Usually you find it with music, using a vocal microphone for like drums or harmonica or something like that. It's going to distort at the microphone. Next one is the mic gain overwhelms the circuit on the mixer. Overmod. Oh, mic gain overwhelms. So if you've got a wireless mic, you're distorting in the mic transmitter before you even get it anywhere else. And then you can't solve it. You can't adjust anything on your mixer to fix it because it's already bad. Next one is overmod on the input to the mixer. Bad equalization in the mixer. Your pot or your potentiometer or fader is too high or too low, and then you're trying to compensate for it later at another stage in the mixer. The master is too high or too low because you may have it up too high or it may be distorting, so you're like, well, let me try and keep it down, it won't be as annoying. Overmod on the amplifier input, which is actually possible. And lastly, feedback, which I have right here. I have it on a slider. So let's talk about bad microphone placement. First of all, we all know as close as we can get it to a person's mouth. You see a lot of better productions, they have a headset mic. Or if you're doing theater, a lot of people, they'll wear microphones in their hair or on their body somewhere. It's part of the costume. So you're trying to keep it as close to the mouth as possible. And what that does is it lets you keep the gain down so that you don't get the room. The next one is a lav mic on the chest like I'm wearing here. I have two because I'm doing two different things. And a podium mic near the speaker like this, like I was saying with this one. And I can't tell you the number of times where the guy's like, I don't want to wear a mic, I'll just stand right here. And then after he starts here, he comes over here. And he continues to talk. And I'm like, you can't compensate for that when you're dealing with these mics, and these mics aren't necessarily the best microphones anyway. We have a handheld mic, like I was saying. You want to keep it near the mouth. You watch, you go, if you've ever done weddings or other events, you watch the DJ. The DJ knows how to work a microphone. He can stand in front of the speaker, but he's holding it right here. And he's talking very loudly, and he's got his system set so that it's not, unless he puts it into the speaker, it's not going to feed back. So keeping a handheld mic near the mouth is critically important. An instrument mic on the instrument. You'll see some instruments like a guitar, they want to play to a mic on a stand. Well, that's a lot further than a guitar mic on the guitar, picking up the strings and the resonance of the chamber. And that gives you much better leeway in the rest of the chain to avoid feedback and other issues. So let's talk about the source audio overwhelming. You want to check the SPL level of your microphone. Microphones have a sound pressure level rating, and they vary depending upon the type of microphone, the manufacturer of the microphone, the size of the microphone. One microphone that a lot of people use is the SM58. It's kind of a classic vocal microphone. Now, it's great for certain tasks. It's not great for other tasks. For instance, if you looked up the information on this, this has a rating of 94 dB. So if you're dealing with something loud like a trumpet blaring right into it, or the kick drum, or playing close mic harmonica or something like that, you can easily overwhelm what this mic can comfortably capture and deliver clean audio. What's SPL stand for? Sound pressure level. So the sound pressure level is, and they've got different sound pressure levels in terms of like an airplane taking off is 110 dB, a rock concert is 100 dB, and OSHA actually has requirements that you should only be exposed to this loud of something for this long. So that's why you see people who do yard work. If they're working for a commercial company, they'll be wearing ear protection because they have to. If they're going to be riding that mower all day, every day, it could ruin their hearing because the sound pressure level is too high. Next thing is you want to adjust the input trim on your mic. And this is one I think most people don't know about or they forget about the most because it's actually kind of difficult to do. But in theater, we did this a lot because we would match a microphone to a performer. I think everybody knows like the Sennheiser microphones, but basically most lavaliers will have an input trim. On the Sennheiser, you go into the menu and it's the sensitivity of the microphone and you can bring it down or bring it up. So you want to have the person, if they're going to sing on stage or if they're going to speak on stage, you want to actually set the gain of the transmitter to their voice. If you're going to clip that microphone to a trumpet, you're going to set it differently. If you're going to clip it to a guitar, you're going to set it differently. If you're, depending upon how that's being used, because this transmitter can be fed different things. You can feed it an XLR audio from a guitar or something like that. An electric guitar you can jack into this thing. And you'll have to adjust the sensitivity of the transmitter appropriately. Otherwise, it's going to start to distort right here. And then after this, there's nothing you can do to fix it. Also, you might think that's the end of it, but there's even an adjustment on the audio out of the receiver. So there's so many, like I say, so many different ways to dial when you're talking about audio, and each one of these has to be right so that you have clean audio all the way through the chain. So the input, and in this case, output trim on your microphone, wireless, in this case, wireless transmitter and receiver.
How do you know what sensitivity is set?
You adjust it to the person. Just based on their voice. And actually, Sennheiser and B&H actually has a page on how to adjust your microphones. Have the person speak in a tone, and usually there will be, like on Sony microphones, there's a little AF and a little thing. When it starts to bounce a little bit while the person's talking, that's good. If it sits, if it just goes up and hits, it's too loud. If they're talking and it doesn't light up, then you're adding so much gain later that you're raising the noise floor, you're raising the hiss. So each wireless system should also include information in the manual. Those printed things that sometimes come with, that I never read. Next, Overmod on the mixer input. One key thing is making sure that if you're feeding line level, don't plug it into the mic, or else you have to bring the gain way down. If you're feeding mic, but all I have is a 1/4 inch, because I've seen people do that. I've got that Shure SM58, plug in an XLR that goes to 1/4 inch. Well, that's meant for something else, but they just jack it into the line level, and they're cranking this thing. Why am I not getting any sound out of this? Well, because you're plugging it into a line level jack, but you're feeding it a mic level from the microphone. And then down, actually this one's different than the mixer that I'm going to be using, but right here, there's a level set LED, which is very nice. Not all mixers have this. The Mackie that I'm going to use later does not have this. This level set is where, while they're talking again, you have the wireless system evened out. Now you plug the wireless system into here, and you adjust your pot so that this blinks. That's 0. So it just touches lightly while they're talking. If it just stays on every time they talk and it's just on, your level is too high, you're going past it. If it doesn't light up at all, you're too low, and you're going to be pushing up your slider beyond to try and get more out of it. Bad equalization. Now I included the gain in here again because these are actually related. You would think that each channel on the mixer is top to bottom. Once I set that, I'm done and I can move down. But in reality, adjusting this EQ affects your gain. So if you're adjusting the EQ and something is boomy, or you want someone to have this big booming presence in the room, I want it to sound like it's resounding through the speakers, and you crank the gain up, what was set nicely, you'll actually notice that it now sits much higher. And I'll demonstrate that here as well. So once you crank the bass up, you got to turn this down so that you now have the proper level again. And the same goes for highs, although you won't notice them as much, but they can get kind of sharp and shrill if your high frequencies are too bright. The pot is too high or your pan is wrong. Now, we've reached the bottom of the mixer. Sometimes the potentiometers are on small mixers, they're knobs. In this case, they're sliders. And you can see that there's headroom over 0. Really, this is unity right here. And then they've got space above it because it's always like, well, it's not loud enough. I need to make it louder. What I do see many times is people who are not familiar with the hundreds of knobs that are on an audio mixer, especially if it's a bigger mixer, a live sound mixer that has, sweepable EQs and 4 aux sends and returns and an FX send. They get down to this button, it's just another button they ignore. So they don't notice that someone else had adjusted the pan on the mixer and they're all pan left or pan right or adjusted in some way, and then they're like, well, why am I only getting sound out of those speakers but not these speakers? Or if they're taking their mixer and they're using it for streaming and house in one mixer, sometimes they'll take that main mix and split it. The left channel main mix goes to your stream. Your right channel main mix goes to house. Well, technically you want them the same, but it's not going to work if somebody's adjusted the pan, and it's slightly to one side. Why can't I get more out of him on the web feed when he's so loud in the house? That's because the pan's misadjusted. Your master's too high or too low. In both the demo mixer and in the photo, we have one that has separate left and right. But if you have a smaller budget mixer, this will just be like one knob. You won't be able to adjust one or the other independently. So that's where the pan comes into play. You have to do everything there in the pan. And then you can actually overmod on amp input. And one of the key reasons is that line level is not line level. There's professional line level and there's consumer line level. And they are two different output levels. So professional line level is +4 dB, consumer line level is -10. So if you're taking a professional mixer and on the back of this one, which I can't really show you just yet, there's a switch to switch between, because it's live, -10 and +4. So if I'm going to feed this into a piece of consumer gear, let's just say I'm going to feed it into a laptop that's going to be my web stream, I want to make sure I'm not feeding it a really hot signal because that's going to affect where it's like I want it to be all at 0, I want it to be nice and even, but why do I have to crank it down so low? It's because your output is too hot on your mixer. And then some amps even have input trims. This is a picture of a Crown amp, and this Crown amp even has internal crossover. So if you just want to use this amp for your bass drivers in the house, then you could tell the amp, strip off everything above 250 hertz. And the amp could do it, because maybe I'm feeding it with a mixer and I don't have output EQs, and I don't have additional equipment. But if the amp can do it, that you have to make sure that each piece in the chain, there's so many different ways to mess this up, so many different places that someone else can mess it up for you. So that's one of the key things that you also need to check. Most cases, once amps are installed, they're in a rack somewhere and nobody touches them. Nobody can mess them up once the professional installer has set them, and this is good. But sometimes, in a portable situation, if it's in a portable rack, they can get adjusted too. Now, feedback. How many people here have ever heard feedback during a presentation? I mean, we all know what feedback is. The room audio gets into the mic, which gets into the room, which gets into the mic. And this is what feedback looks like on a scope. And this one is around 1K. But there's the main feedback, and then you can actually see that there's two overtones, one above 2K and one above 5K. So it's kind of complex. You can manually, if you have like a 30-band EQ, which is what a lot of people use to correct room audio, they'll sit there and they'll notch, oh, I know where that's at, and then they'll notch it, but they don't notch the overtones. So those frequencies are still kind of hanging around, ready to give you some feedback. Now, these days, thankfully, feedback is easy enough that we can use hardware to help us kill it. In this case, the mixer that I was using for the pictures is a Behringer Eurorack, and right over here, it has a feedback exterminator, which that little notch, and all you do is you push this button, and the digital circuitry will, as soon as it starts to hear that thing come up, it puts a notch in. I don't know how many are built into this box, but generally there's enough to handle most easy room problems. And then, of course, there's an EQ for the room as well. If you're finding the room's a little bassy, the room is, too live, it's got the bright walls and stuff like that, you can correct for that as well. And then in addition to, if you don't have a mixer that does that, you can buy outboard devices. This is the Shark, and there are, Mini, Yamaha makes one, a lot of companies make them now. This goes in between the mixer and the amp. Takes the output of your mixer, and it doesn't raise the level, it doesn't lower the level, but what it does is it listens for that heterodyne, that rising tone, and it puts that notch in. Now, it's important, though, that these things need to be set. You'll find guys will go into a room before a big show, and they'll open up the mics, and they'll have people wear the mics, or they'll just put them on a table, and they'll slowly raise that, and they'll raise the house, they'll raise the audio, raise the audio, and then you'll have that first note come in, and you'll hear it go away. And then they'll raise the house a little more, and you hear that second note, and it'll get a notch. Now, technically, you could try and keep going, but as you keep going, it's more and more of it's going to feed back. But what these devices do is they let you get a few dB louder in the room than you could without them. They're not going to totally fix it and like, oh, now I can just crank anything up at any volume I want. No, they're not magic. But in a difficult room, let's just say the room had marble on the walls, that's going to be tough, because it's just so reflective with sound. Well, you might have to keep it much lower. I worked in a facility where the main hall had a glass ceiling and tile floor. I mean, it was reverberant. And they had big speakers set up on top, and they shot outward like this. So it didn't even feed like where the audience was on the floor. It just shot outward. So it bounced around a little bit before it came down. And without one of these, the room was basically unusable. You could never get it loud enough on the floor, especially if there's a big crowd, because there's always a percentage of the crowd not paying attention, carrying on their own conversations, chatting, phones ringing, things like that. And with the tile floor, just walking around. People with hard shoes, the noise floor is so high already. So these things are very handy to have. So at this point, does anybody have any questions? No? Okay. At this point, we have the Audio Ninja. This is the demo time. So I'm going to try to walk through a couple things. And to do that, I'm going to jump over here. There we go. So this is live. This is not a slide. And it bounces. So what I was talking about before is, your mic input, this is balanced or unbalanced. Your line input, you have a low cut, which is not really critical in terms of EQ, but if you have somebody wearing a body mic, and they touch their body a lot, you can add that, put in the low cut, and it's not as thumpy. Or if you have a microphone that has a lot of handling noise, the low cut can help remove that as well and give you cleaner audio, because in most cases, what we're trying to do in a webcast, unless you're doing a music show or stage or church, you're doing voices. So it's a very narrow range that you want to make sure is clean. So removing everything else as much as possible helps make sure that what you want is as clean as possible. And then down here, this one has aux sends, and then we'll get to the EQ in a minute. So I've got a microphone plugged in up here, And we're going to see if I can use it to, so what I was saying with this is down here, loosen this. Down here, this mixer has a solo, and not all mixers have this. I brought another mixer before I grabbed this one that does not have a solo. But on this mixer, this is a Mackie 1402. When you hit the solo button, over here, they call this the rude solo light to remind you that a solo button is pressed and what the meter is showing you is not your mix. If you ever read a Mackie manual, it's actually kind of fun because the comedy that they put into different things, you know, like one of them says, well, we give you 20 dB of headroom. Why? Because you never see a band on stage point at the speakers and say, turn it down. They always point at the speakers and say, turn it up. Because, you know, they're all deaf anyway. So, let's see if I can get all of this in here. There we go. So, faders are down. My solo light is showing me my input trim. And I'm wearing the microphone, and I have it here. So when I turn this up, you can see that over here now, my level is just bouncing across 0. Sometimes if I talk louder, it'll go up. But most times if I talk quieter, it'll be underneath 0. That's where you want your input trim to be. If I had the bass up, so now I turn the bass back down, and my overall level is a little bit lower. So affecting the bass, there, I turn the bass all the way up, and now it's peaking pretty consistently higher over here, although my voice level is not appreciably different. But if I turn the bass down, now all of a sudden I'm not as loud. So the EQ directly affects what you need to do with your trim, because you don't want to overmodulate on your input. And that's actually the thing I hear most is, and I have to admit, it's usually from a phone patch. Because the phone patch, you know, you want to hook somebody in from a phone patch. Oh, here's so-and-so calling in from China. And they jack it in here, and usually on those devices, there's almost no audio adjustment, and the audio is always clipped, and it sounds so scratchy and annoying that if you can find some way to EQ that and adjust the input trim, you know, have them talk a little bit further from the phone and then give them more gain here will give you a cleaner bit of audio. So now I've set my input trim, well, that's a little high now. I've set my input trim to a decent level. I don't need to change my EQ that much, so I'm just going to leave it flat. If I wanted it a little bright, I don't even know if I can use this mic. I'll turn this up a little bit. 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. Oh, turn this one off. 1, 1, 1, 1. Hello. Okay, so now I'm actually going through this mixer. And I'm trying to do it in such a way that I don't feed back. If you increase your brights, you can hear the sibilance becomes a little sharper. You can hear that if someone mumbles a little bit, you can give them a little bit of high EQ, and then it gives them a little bit clearer sound, even though I'm just kind of mumbling around. But I have that sibilant. Whereas if you have someone that whistles a little bit in their teeth, and you know they just seem to have a sharp sound to them, a whiny sound, you can bring that high frequency back a little bit, and that will give them a more rounded sound. Similarly, if you have a microphone that doesn't have a very good round sound to it, it's a very flat microphone, kind of blah, you know, cheap piece of junk. It's been around forever, but you needed another microphone. You throw it in there, and you got to make it sound like the rest of them. You know, you can give a little bit of high end, you can give a bit of low end, and then all of a sudden it sounds a little bit better, a little warmer, a little stronger. But also, you have to think, there's 3 knobs here. If I've come to theaters and I've seen somebody say, oh, okay, well, I adjusted it there, and then I felt it needed more mid-range because I couldn't hear the voice very much, but then, you know, then the high end and I added more high end, and I'm like, you're turning up all 3. That's doing this. That's turning the slider up. You know, the EQ is meant for like minute fine tuning. It's not meant for turning all 3 up. It's not meant for turning all 3 down. because I've seen other instances in corporate events where somebody's up there on stage and they're talking, they get a high frequency, feedback start to come in, and they bring the high pot down, and then, it sounds kind of bassy, so let me turn the bass down. Oh, well, now the mid-range is all kind of nasally. Well, let me turn the mid down. Well, you just turned all three down. You turned the overall level down. They all work together, and there's a measurement called Q as to how wide of frequencies each of these cover. Some of them have a very narrow Q, most of them have a very wide Q. Higher end mixers will actually let you vary the frequency that these affect. So you'll have like high frequency, your high frequency, but then what frequency that is, and you can adjust it, which is also good for taking out that feedback. Mid frequency and what frequency it is. And then you have low as well. And then your pan, so right now I'm only using one channel to feed the house, so if my pan was over here, all of a sudden, I'm gone. But everything else looks fine. It's just that the pan is now moved to 9 o'clock. I bring it back to 12 o'clock, and I sound fine. I mean, just the small difference can make a dramatic difference either to the room or your webcast, because it depends on which one you're using for the room, which one you're using for the webcast. So your pan doesn't seem like a very important knob until it's set in the wrong place. Then all of a sudden, it's a very important knob. And then lastly, your faders. Now excuse me, the output of the mixer is line level, and I'm feeding into a mic level cable, so I have to keep it artificially low. I can't bring them up to unity, which is what you would do if you were feeding an amplifier. So I just wanted to explain why everything is set so low, yet I'm feeding the room, is because I pulled this mic cable to feed the mixer. So in so doing, I've demonstrated that you can actually deal with multiple different audio levels, feeding mic with a line level output. You can, but you just have to be aware of don't just push everything up, because you push it up, it will feed back. Now, there's other things that you can do in terms of aux sends. If you want to feed stereo to your house, and you want to have left and right, like they're going to be playing music, there's going to be a video portion of what's going to happen, and that needs to be played back in the room, and it's got a good soundtrack, and you really want people to enjoy it in stereo. You can't split your tracks like this and have one for web and one for house. You need to have both your main mix for the house. Then you need to find another place to get your audio for your webcast, and usually that's the aux bus. Many mixers will have an aux bus. Let me just bring out this other one here, just to show you a different way of doing it. This is a much simpler mixer. It only has 4 inputs, 3 EQs. Here's your input trims up here. Here's your low cut filter right here. And it has an FX. Now over here it has built-in effects. You can add reverb. You can add, this is more like a live mixer, so you can add different things like that. But one of the key features with this mixer is up here, and watch me not be able to hear this, FX send. Well, before it even gets to this thing, it allows you to take that audio out of the mixer and send it someplace else. And the FX is most often post-fader. You can see these are not faders, these are just knobs, potentiometers. And what that means is when I turn this up for the house, I'm also turning it up on the FX send, and each of these I can vary independently. So coming back here, I have aux 1 and aux 2. And then over here, I can say whether obviously a more complex mixer, I can say whether the aux 1 is pre or post fader. If I want to mix independently, like I want to have something going to the webcast that's not in the house, then I can do these pre-fader, which will be up, and then I'm mixing my web show up here. And this one is out, and this one is out, and this one is out. So these 3 things are going in the house, but they're not going in the webcast. These 3 are going to the webcast. But if I don't want to try and have to manage and remember to adjust two different sets of audio, you can go post fader, which basically means whatever these are set at, whether it just be unity or whether you need a particular adjustment to them, when you adjust the slider down here, oh, okay, Bob walks on stage. Let me bring up Bob. Well, you're bringing up Bob to the house and to web. When Bob walks off stage, fade Bob out, that mic is dead, both on stage and on the web. So that way, you just have to worry about one set of mixers, one set of adjustments, and not have to worry about two. Because there's been times when, Bob's gone in the house, but they're pre-fader, and they forgot to bring this down too. Or Bob walks up on stage, and they go like this. Oh, I hear him just fine, but nobody on the web can hear him because they forgot to turn up the knob. So it's like trying to mix two different shows on one mixer, and having a big set of sliders and a little set of knobs makes it quite challenging to remember to do each thing. So generally I do post fader. And then lastly, you can take your main outs, and you can also, there's main outs on the back, XLRs, and there's a second set of main outs. There's a set of tape outputs. And you can take each of those, you can take the main mix and feed it in two different directions, and even take your main mix and feed it into a second mixer. So now I've done all my main mixing, and anything that the web needs that's different will be in this other mixer, and I don't have to worry about it ever happening in the room. A key reason you might do that is if you have like PZM microphones in the room for questions that come up out of the audience. Yeah, I have a question, I want to know about something, something, something. People almost never wait for the microphone runner to get the microphone to them. They just start shouting, what about X? If you have your other mics over here, I have like 4 PZM mics covering the room like this. I can have those up all the time, or I can have them down until a question comes up, and then I have my main mix come over into here. So my main mix always just passes through. Then my 4 room mics, there's no chance of them going in the room. They are on the output of the other mixer. They are on the output of the web mixer solely. So you never have to worry about those feeding back into the room. Whereas if you try to mix them into the same mixer, then you run the risk. And most often, the webcasts that I work, we do a 2-mixer setup. We bring in house AV to do the house, set up the speakers, do the drape, and they set up lights, and they have their audio mixer, and they do all the mic running and lav checks, and they're responsible for all the equipment. We rent that out. And then when our webcast comes in, we set up our mixer, and we set up our mics and our telephone patch and our, all the additional stuff that is related to the webcast, and that's separate of the house. And the only tie back in from us is if we have a video playing from the laptop that's doing the slides, that has to feed back to the house, and it has to feed to the webcast. But obviously, if it feeds to the house is coming to us. So as long as it's good in the house, it's good here, and it also gives us a great excuse when we can't hear somebody, we just yell over to the house guy, turn it up. Are there any questions with regards to adjusting audio mixers in terms of live audio? I think that is all the information I have. I am actually done a little early, so I will take open questions from the field in terms of audio mixing. If anybody had a chance to check out the Roland booth with the VR50, it has a very nice audio mixer. But one of the things you have to wrap your head around is that the EQ is in a menu. It's like, oh, let me give this guy a little bit of polish. Okay, touch this one, touch that, bring up the EQ, then you can adjust it. You're 2-3 taps away. Whereas with a standalone audio mixer, every channel has their own EQ standing there, and you could, be adjusting 2 different things at the same time. You could be adjusting 2 different levels at the same time. Don't lean under the microphone at the same time. And one of the nice things that I noticed with the Sony Anycast touch that they had here, you could touch, once your video is set up and you're just punching the video, you can tab over to on the bottom control surface, you can tab over to an audio mixer. Now, generally, I'm not a fan of virtual interfaces because you have to look at them, whereas if I'm looking at them, I'm not looking at the video. I'm not watching what's happening on stage or off stage, or I'm not paying attention to that. I'm trying to keep my fingers on something that I can't physically feel. Whereas this one, you can lay your fingers on there. I can find the third one. I can bring it up. I know what's going on without having to look at it. But why does it keep going up? Maybe it's an automatic level control that I don't know about. Anyway, the Anycast was multi-touch, so that you could actually put 3 fingers down and be adjusting two different people, 3 different people. He says it was up to 8, I think. I don't know how you get 8 fingers properly on there, but it was actually pretty impressive. It was sort of mixer-ish, but in a non-tactile way. You're still trying to slide across a glass surface, and it just doesn't, it's not the, have I reached the bottom? It doesn't click when it reaches the bottom. So it's up to the individual user whether that type of interface is okay or not, or whether, like on the Roland, tabbing into a menu to adjust your EQ and adjust other settings is okay. As I mentioned before, one of the nice things with the Roland is it has a gate. And what that means is, as long as the level is below this much, it's not going to actively use that channel. It's still listening, the mixer is listening to it, but it's not that audio from that channel is not being passed on, which greatly lessens the chance that you're going to get room feedback from 5 open mics on a panel table. So that's a nice feature that you don't find in a big mixer like this. You might have to step up a couple levels or different brands to find that type of feature, or they have new digital mixers, that all the EQ, all the sends, all the patching, all the routing is all virtual, and then you can send it to an actual control surface. But the nice things with those is the house guys use it on the webcasts that I work regularly on. He works the same show. We have the same 5 microphones, and it's pretty much the same, same type of microphones, the same EQ. He saves it. It's a file. It's called Trinity. And he comes back in, puts his mixer down, loads up Trinity, it's there. And he just makes basic tweaks because the room is the same. Almost every, it's very much the same. It's not like going between, a super large hall and a small thing. It's the same room every time. So he's able to load that back in. The faders are automated. They pop into the same place they were last time. All the EQs, all the room, all the noise gates, they all just come right back in. So, having a menu system in higher end systems actually pays off in terms of speed and efficiency. Whereas you can't, there's no way unless you sat down and wrote down, okay, EQ1 and EQ2 and EQ3 on pod 1, and it's going to be quite a challenge to come anywhere near that flexibility. Yes?
Low, mid, high, those are only 3 values on the EQ. Are there other options to expand that, or at that point is it easier just to go to a feedback destroyer?
If you need to compensate for a room, an 8 or a 31 band EQ post mixer is your first step. Most AVs that I find, and actually in some of the other rooms, the rack that they have has the 31 band EQ in it, so that they go into a room, it's a little bright, they can find where those frequencies are annoying or need help, and they can adjust for it. So you'll find a crooked line on the mixer, even though the room sounds fine. If you just need to worry about feedback extermination from a live show, like house speakers, as opposed to speakers face in front of the stage facing away from me, that would be a better solution in terms of giving you audio that's not coming to me. Then a feedback exterminator I find to be a very worthwhile tool to have in a kit. I mean, they're not that expensive, and when you need it, it's like, plug, it's in line, and you can watch it. I had one that you'd hear it and you'd see it, boop, it would just light up and start blinking. I got one, boop, got 2. And I felt some sort of satisfaction that we killed it. Yes?
What do you think about in-ceiling speakers for this type of application?
They suck. Should I broaden that? In-ceiling speakers are usable. They're generally not high fidelity. You know, they're very boomy because I think in most cases they're not enclosed speakers, they're open back, so it's just resonating into whatever chamber is above the drop ceiling. So they don't have good sound, so you EQ the bass down a little bit. And they don't set up these rooms, I mean, these are made for various types of things. So these rooms aren't made necessarily for corporate talking, whereas if you were to make one for that, you could actually, in the rooms that I've been, you set up the second room is louder than the first room. And that audio would come back a little bit, as opposed to being loud right here, which is how this room is set up. This speaker, 10 feet from me, 15 feet from me is, as loud as your speaker. So if I were to try to walk on the floor closer to being underneath the speaker, that's a problem. I couldn't walk around the room. Whereas other rooms, might have more directional speakers, or aim them away, or bring in speakers on podiums. And then, if the room is long enough, you'll have a second set. So you have a first set that's not trying to fill the room, it's only trying to fill so many rows, and then a second set fills the rest, or even a third set. And then, when you do that, you get into timing issues, because sound takes so long to get there, but electricity is much faster. So if the room is really deep and the second set of speakers is broadcasting the sound before the first wall of sound gets there, you actually get an echo. So you have to delay the second set of speakers however many milliseconds for however many feet, so that when that first wave of sound gets there, the second set of speakers emits the sound in the same time, in phase.
What makes it worse, too, in these setups is that you're 24 inches above. You're closer to the speaker.
Yes.
If you're actually walking the floor,
It's quieter.
It wouldn't actually be as bad as if you were there in terms of feedback potential.
If I hid under the table, it would be even better.
Anthony, what about compressors? You didn't touch on that too much, but I've seen them coming in. Roland has that in their VR50HD. Behringer has little compressor knobs on there. I'm curious because I haven't started using them. I'm wondering, do I want to, or should I be using other parts of the board and leave that as a gimmick?
Compressors are useful. Compressors are useful when the situation warrants it. If you have a very dynamic speaker, like when I did a Baptist Sunday church celebration, Lord have mercy, and then they come down and they're like, and you have to understand what I'm talking about. I know. So it's from shouting, so you could have somebody, you got to have a really good person on audio to ride that thing, or you could leverage the mixer to sort of save, because you will clip either the input level, you will, because it's like if you want to capture the quiet part, you got to have the level loud enough where him shouting may be clipping. So then you have to have some sort of way to keep that level low enough, but then bring it up and not, it's such a dynamic range that you actually want to make it all sort of like radio. You want to level it out. Maybe not as much as radio, but you get the picture where it's easier to listen to. And I find that compressors and limiters, when used judiciously a little bit, just to bring the top peaks down a little bit, allows you to bring up everything to a more even keel. But I find when it's used heavy-handedly, let's just make everybody even, let's just even everything out, you really hear it. It sounds compressed. It has this particular sound where there's no dynamic range, and you can actually hear that somebody's starting to talk loud, but then they actually got quieter. That just sounds weird, but it's the hardware working opposite their voice. So, just gently tapping down on the peaks is useful, I find. I did a cooking show, and we had a chef from Texas who was very boisterous. His normal tone was, okay, but he would always say, things are great, and the great would always be this huge arc of a word, and you'd watch the meters and, blah, 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 and it would always swing way over. So I added a limiter, and realistically, the limiter came into play only during those peaks. The rest of the time, it was just regular dynamic audio. I just wanted to avoid any sort of clipping when we fed the signal to the deck. Yes?
What about, I noticed on that Roland mixer,
This-
there's a
Oh, the one that was on the slides?
Well, I think it's the one you recommended, the Roland switcher has an open option.
Oh, the VR50?
Yes. But I mean, obviously this doesn't have a high pass and low pass, so is there a recommendation if a room does tend to have those frequencies? Is there equipment you recommend I buy, or, some sort of way of dealing with those so that it's not in the general mix of the dialogue?
Well, high pass and low pass are generally, they're at the ends of the spectrum. Like this has a low cut, which is basically a high pass. It's just a different way of calling the same thing. And all it's doing is pulling out frequencies below 75 hertz. Nothing you say is in 75 hertz. So for my dialogue, having it in or out really makes zero difference. I mean, they come into play when you're doing something that has a much greater range of frequency. Music for the most part. So you don't want somebody screaming into the microphone of the band, but you don't want handling noise. That's not part of the vocal range, so you can strip that out. You could also EQ it out too. If you wanted to use an aux send and then feed it back in, you can send his dialogue channel to an external mixer. Here's your dialogue, and that's all you get. Everything else is gone. Just be careful not to strip out the sibilances at around 10 to 15. Yes?
A little bit of, I don't know if you go through the setup much using like phone call-in, so there's two-way audio when you're doing webcasts. Did you do that?
I did, and I used the JK audio interface, which actually had a bit of level adjustment, and then I went and I tried to use the Gettner, which didn't, and I was just like, I thought there was a standard with these things, but apparently there's not. I mean, you've probably done more.
With the Gettner, yeah, I didn't play with it, someone else did, so.
Okay, yeah, the devices, because phone audio is already heavily compressed, frequency limited, to fit down these two copper wires spreading across the entire country, that there's not a lot you have to do with it, but every now and then you'll get a problem where the signal coming out of the box is too hot to go into your mixer, or for whatever reason, it's distorting on their end. They're just shouting into the microphone, or they've got a cell phone and they're calling into a thing. And then the problem is, well, they're calling into a meeting space, and it's all in this virtual environment, and there's no way that you could reach into that environment and turn them down because they're distorting. I usually just tell people, just hold the phone. You don't have to hold it really close. I can hear you fine. Just hold it out, speak at a normal level, and we'll do the rest on our end. Because it's odd, but I think all of us might be guilty of it. I know I'm guilty of it. Where if I'm very insistent on something, I feel I have to say it louder because you're 3,000 miles away. I have to compensate for that by speaking louder, even though there's a massive amount of technology between me and the end, and it really doesn't make much of a difference. I just sound like I'm speaking loudly. I'm not any louder. So the phone interfaces are a world unto their own, and they have, looking at different products will give you different capabilities. Generally, what I find is, when I was looking at the JK audio solutions, you got your basic, phone line comes in, audio comes out, and then you got your little better, and then you got one with a keypad, and you can put in a headset in, which was good for like, well, let me test the phone line first, jack in the phone line, make the call, okay, good, I can talk to you, and we didn't have to do the rest. The output pot was, nothing went to the house at all, so we're just double checking the line so that the president who couldn't, president of the company who couldn't be here, he's going to be calling in, type of thing. But nowadays, I think Skype is even more prevalent, in which case you're coming out of a laptop, which you'd come in the line audio and be adjusting your output level of the laptop so that you've got the right level here. And again, right here on this one, you've got your level. Is it +4 or -10? +4 or -10? +4 or -10? Because it doesn't know whether you're feeding this professional line level out of a professional audio piece of gear or whether you're feeding it out of a consumer piece of gear like a DVD player. You have to adjust for that so that 0 is the proper 0. Not that you could center everything on -10, but it just makes it easier when, hey, everything lines up great, and it's just easier to then focus on what might potentially be problems when you've got everything evened out, and you've started from the first step and made sure your audio is good all the way through the chain. Because that's I think is the key thing, starting, even with microphone selection and all the way back down the chain. So, any other questions? Yes? Yes. Yes. Yes, that's right. I usually tell them to use a headset. You could bring down your level, a little bit to compensate immediately, but then realistically they need to bring down their level so that you can then feed everyone else the proper level. I mean, have you had that issue?
Yes, it's a similar solution, right? Headset, or if anything, if they're coming through like a webcam, well, it's okay to send the webcam image and the audio, but monitor it through headphones. You don't need a boom mic for that, but just turn your speakers off, put on the headphones. That way, you're not getting that echo. There's no way. Otherwise, you got to make sure your speakers aren't placed close to the mic, and it's just not going to work out. You pretty much have to isolate it as much as you can. Otherwise, there's no way. If you do, it makes minus and get rid of one, not the other.
Yeah, that is a very tricky challenge because a lot of people just want to like flip open their laptop, pop it on, and be involved in the production. And it works on your end, but it doesn't work in terms of the other 1,000 people who are involved in the thing. You have to put your earbuds in, plug it into the laptop. Now the audio only goes into your head and your audio can go to everywhere. Whereas if the audio is coming back out of the speakers, yeah, you get that feedback pretty quick. I mean, when people use Skype to talk back and forth, Skype is designed not like a telephone. On a telephone, you actually get feedback in your own ear as to how loud you are. But Skype is designed so that when you speak, that audio is not reflected back to you. Even if you wear a headset, it doesn't reflect back to you. You have to just use your own gauge as to how loud I'm speaking. Which?
Well, when, like what Skype is trying to do or what Skype does.
No, Skype just doesn't give it to you. It's a mix minus is taking the same mix minus that particular element. I mean, yeah, I guess what you're saying, yes. Yes, yeah, their version. So they get everyone else's sound coming out of their speakers, but they don't get, if everybody's on Skype, this is different. If everybody's on, a Skype meeting, and they all got their laptop, and I talk, Skype knows, okay, don't send Janet's audio back out on Janet's laptop. Send everybody else's audio out Janet's laptop. Bob gets Janet, but Bob doesn't have Bob coming out of the speakers. Because Bob doesn't need it. He can hear himself. Anything else? Yes? I always set the gain term first. Yeah, you have to set the gain of the channel that you're using properly, because this is where, this is a little knob that so many people forget about. They're just worried about this, and somebody else can come in here and these knobs are all turned in different directions, and if this knob is turned all the way down here, you got to crank hello, 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 you got to crank this thing all the way up. It's like, man, why do I have to go to plus 10 to get any audio out of this thing? Well, that's because you got it too far down. It's not set right. And if you use, on this mixer, you can use the solo, and the solo will tell you that my input level is not even registering. Hello, 1, 2, there it is, minus 30. So it's pretty low. If I bring then when I bring this up, 1, 2, I have a decent level, and I don't have to smack it against the ceiling. You know, I've been to, you know, events where the audio person, the house AV person, not necessarily the best house AV person, no offense to house AV, but not everybody's great. Where I come in and, you know, the individual channel pots are all at like +5 and +10, and the house is at +10, and it's still fairly quiet in the room. And I'm going, somewhere back in the chain, there's a level that's not set right. And it could even be, as like I said, as far back as on the microphone. You know, somebody had it set for something that was really loud, and then it, you know, the next time it was used, you put it on a person who's fairly low spoken. You know, they're barely touching the meter on this thing, and you got to crank everything up after the fact. So starting, you know, with the microphone selection, input trims, output trims, then you start at the mixer. You know, there's 3 or 4 stages before you even get to your input trim on the mixer. You know, especially if more than one person is using, you know, your wireless system. You know, next time you pick it up, settings are all different. You know, that's why it's nice when you go to like equipment that just has a reset, like the Folsom for the scaler for the projector. Well, how did the last person have it set? What frame rate? What, you know? You just go to tick, 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 reset, zoop, all gone. And then you can, you know, then you start to, you know, set it up for the next conference. Anything else? Make sure on the forms you say, "Oh, it was awesome." I don't know if there's any forms. Thank you.